Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of Dreaming Tech, the show put together between Synagogue Tech and Dreaming Up 5781. The sessions where we try and help you, people running services at synagogues and other areas, to deliver your services online and with a technology that changes. We've got a great panel today, and I'd like to get the panel to introduce themselves. Before I do that, for questions, we like to use Slido. Slido, the numbers are up there, so hopefully we can bring that up on the screen. And the Slido code, go to slido.com and DT Dreaming Tech 5781. If you put in your questions there, we can vote up and you can put in your questions for the panel. So first up on the panel today that I have is J-Lo. J-Lo.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Joanna from Pennsylvania, and I am part of the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum show that Marty does. Talking about how to bring the next step to worship, which is how to do the hybrid tech. Happy to be here.
Thank you, JLo. In fact, as you said it, we should actually introduce Marty, as Marty is next on that list. Marty.
Hi there. Yeah, Marty Atias. I am in Silver Spring, Maryland, host of the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. Happens every Thursday at 7 evening. Eastern time, and Leo is a panelist, Joanna is a panelist, and we have lots of good things going on. We talk about very similar issues here, all technical, and when we're talking technical, really doesn't matter what our denomination is, but I'm also a longtime engineer for broadcast and audio and video.
Before you think we just have people from the Hybrid Tech Ministries Forum on, I'm going to pass over to Oren.
Hi, Rabbi Oren Steinitz. I'm from Elmira, New York, formerly a sound engineer, currently a congregational rabbi and congregational tech person and congregational everything because we're small and underfunded. Yes. Yes.
I think everybody who's underfunded, or it always feels like underfunded, especially when you're going to be talking about what we need to do to deliver stuff online. Next, I'm going to ask to introduce themselves is coming over this side of the pond with me is Jonathan Fiber.
Hi, I'm John. I live in High Barnet in North London. I'm a member of the Ark Synagogue, and I'm a sound engineer, and I write music for theatre and various other things, do video, and have adapted in the last year due to the nature of things.
Great. Back to the Hybrid Tech Forum. Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum, and a really welcome and a great person to be on this, especially with the conversations we're talking about today, is Jay.
Hi. Thank you so much. My name is Jay Paul. I'm in Ellicott City, Maryland, and I'm an audio engineer. And I've been spending quite a bit of time with Leo and Marty and Joanna with the Hybrid Ministries Tech Forum. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
And finally, in this section, actually, I'm going to before I get to that person, I'm going to ask Sue. Sue's going to be talking and covering some of the stuff, answering your questions a bit later. So I'd like Sue to just introduce herself because she'll be on in the second half.
Hi, everybody. I'm Soto Piloski. I'm with Swezzers, which is Southwest Essex, and Settlement Reform Synagogue over in Essex in the UK. And somehow or other, I've become the tech person for us. I knew nothing about tech or AV or sound or anything. About 14 months ago, I've been on a steep learning curve.
Brilliant. And then so finally, and reason for being last is because he's got a lot to tell us today about some other things, is Rabbi David.
Hold on. Sorry about that. I'm switching and I forgot to unmute. Hi, everybody. I'm David, your Torah tech guy, and I'm very excited to be here. And I'm joining for the first time the Hybrid Ministries this week, and I'm really excited about learning with everyone. Just as a participant, I have nothing to add. I just want to learn. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and also very excited to invite everyone to a Torah Tech Summit on Sunday, June 27th. Information will be at torahtechguy.com/summit, but Leo and Marty and many people here are going to be a part of that, in addition to leaders from ProPresenter, leaders from Cinemaker. We're going to take a whole day and really just kind of do a deep dive into lots of different really pertinent areas that synagogues, temples, churches are confronting and thinking about as they approach the high holidays and this new normal. So I invite everyone to join us there. And thank you so much, Leo, for inviting me to be here today.
So this is a really good time to, so what we're seeing is this will be probably the end of our season 1 of what we're doing here, at the end when that event that David is running. And we've run I think this is our 10th or 12th show on here. And everything is available for pre-recorded that we've done is available on YouTube, so you can watch it later. But we've covered a load of sessions and a load of sections and everything. And we think it's coming to a nice point where it's like, let's cover everything in that conference, the summit that David is running, and then see where we are, see how things have come, and see what people's thoughts are, rather than we've just pushed this out and come back. So talking about pushing things out and coming back is I've sent out the link to join us. Please ask your questions and vote on the questions on Slido. If you're watching this on YouTube, Facebook, you can also vote as well. The questions are available there. So please vote on there, or please put in your questions, please vote, and we will try and see if we can get to your questions. So the first thing up that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to pass over to Marty, is a couple of sessions ago, we talked about the whole idea and the concepts of mixes and what mix minuses are and how audio is important. And you can go back and have a look in that. There is a link to that, so you can see the first part of that session. So really, Marty, where do we take it from here?
Well, we think about all the different places that we have to route audio to. We have audio that we're routing into the room and routing into maybe a hearing assistance system and routing into maybe an overflow room or another room within the facility. And we're thinking about routing audio outside of the facility on our conferencing network. Which could be Zoom, it could be YouTube, it could be Facebook Live. And if it's YouTube or Facebook, that's a one-way broadcast. And so that's pretty easy. But when we're talking about Zoom or Teams or any other two-way conferencing network, and we think about the potential to have people from home or elsewhere join in the service in the sanctuary, now we're bringing audio in from outside. And so that's a two-way conversation. And you don't want to get into a situation where the audio you have coming in is going back out to the person who is speaking. And you don't want the same situation, the audio that is in the room going out to whoever is listening out there, coming back into the room, because either way, you're creating a feedback loop. If audio that's coming in is going back out, coming back in, going back out, you have a feedback loop. And because we're talking about internet networking, that loop is on a delay. So you would hear an audio, and then you'd hear it again. And then you'd hear it again. So we want to break that feedback loop from audio coming in and going back out. And
you must have had this a lot on how when we were in person, this used to be a problem all the time in the room. Is it just that we've just moved it forward to something that has now even more difficult now that people aren't in the room?
Right. Well, in the room, the similar situation is you have microphones and you have loudspeakers. And if you have a microphone that is picking up sound from a loudspeaker, in addition to the person who's actually standing in front of the microphone, it's going to sound hollow, it's going to sound reverberant, and if the levels are high enough, it could cause feedback, like howling feedback. This can happen on a pulpit, it can happen on a music stage when you have floor monitors, or if the main speakers are on the back wall behind the stage and there are microphones up in front of the stage, those microphones can pick up the sound from those speakers. And so we always want to be able to avoid feedback from your loudspeakers. But when we're talking about an internet connection, those loudspeakers are delayed because they're coming from outside. And so if we take a look at a couple of diagrams, here's one. This is an image of a standard analog mixing board. And this mixing board has inputs, which we haven't noted here because we're really talking about outputs. And, one output is the main left-right output to the loudspeakers. And you may have an auxiliary output going to floor monitors for musicians. In some cases, I've put monitors up on pulpits. And then we have an output. This output here is going to a computer for Zoom. And from this computer, there's an output going back to the mixer, and this is how we hear people from Zoom. And we can take a look at a little more complex image. Here we have a digital mixer, but that's really inconsequential because the functioning is exactly the same. And we have on this picture, we have a bunch of different inputs, a pulpit microphone, wireless microphones over on the left here, piano, guitar, drums, and then finally down here at the bottom, there's a singer. And I've color-coded each of these kinds of inputs. And then down here, way at the bottom, there's a computer for Zoom, and then it has an input to the mixer as well. And that's a broader red arrow. And so I've taken these outputs and the color coding is the same. So pretty much all of the inputs that we have, including Zoom, are going to go out to the loudspeakers over here. You can see that there's except, I should amend that, except that there are some of these instruments that may be loud enough in the room that they don't need to be amplified. And so we will take those out of the mix, like drums, for instance, electric guitar, electric bass. They could be loud enough so that they don't need to be amplified in the room. And so we're taking those out of the mix. We are minusing them out of the mix. And so here over here, where you have the main loudspeakers, you have a full mix minus the piano, the guitar, and the drums. Then we have another output that we're sending to an overflow room. Now, because they're not in the same room with the drums and the guitar and the piano, that output needs a full mix. So that's everything. And then we have a third output that's going to the computer to send out to Zoom. And that has a full mix except for the input that is coming from Zoom. So we're minusing Zoom out of that mix.
So there's a couple of things, just a couple of quick questions here before we move on. Oren, did you have a question on this?
No, I was wondering a little bit before when you mentioned putting monitors in pulpits. What would be the reason for that, rather than compared to floor monitors or in-ears?
So there's one church that I consult with, and they have a high pulpit that is set back from the front wall of the sanctuary. And so they're actually behind the loudspeakers. And so they can't hear, and they're also behind the musicians, behind the choir. Anything that happens activity-wise happens on the floor in front of the pulpit. So the pulpit is looking down, and behind everybody who is singing or playing or acting or doing a story, so that they can't really hear anything. So I have a small loudspeaker up in the pulpit so that they can hear everything that's going on in the service.
So in the past, what you were having a lot of times is that the distance of people in the room was causing problems. So the physical location of people, the choir over here to people there. Now I see it, and we'll cover it in a bit in the example we have a bit later, is that people sing with what they hear and then they're out of time. Now, if you're in the room, it may be a few milliseconds, but it's still quite disconcerting. But when you're online, this makes the problem even worse. Is that where you came from on this on there, Marty?
Yes, because they can't really hear, they can't interact during the service. So if they're speaking in between lines of a song, for instance, they can't hear the lines, and so they can't speak. But they also want to be able to hear everybody who's singing. They want to be able to hear everybody else who's participating in the service, because they're part of the service as well.
Okay.
So it's both for their comfort, for their enjoyment, and for their cues.
Got you. Before we move on, there's a lot more to do. I put up a poll for us on the Slido, just to ask us where you're joining us from. It'd be great if you could fill it in, and if you haven't used Slido, to use it there. So we're going to start getting questions coming in already, but please put them in. This is your show for you to ask this panel questions about what you want to know. The more you ask us, the more you're going to get the questions answered that you want to get answered. So carry on, Marty.
All right. And so then we'll take a look at, so we went through this diagram here, this one here, right? And so we're sending out 3 different mixes to 3 different places, and they have 3 different combinations of inputs. And so some of them are a full mix, like the overflow, and some of them have things that are minused out of them. And the most important one that we're talking about here is the Zoom mix, because we don't want to send the Zoom input to the mixer, output back to Zoom. So that's a really important thing to do. And I take a look at, I don't know if we want to go there.
I don't think we want to go there.
So let's take see if there are any questions about that.
David.
Marty, can I? Yeah. I think part of the issue for us audio, people who know nothing, is we can get all that routing correct, but as soon as a Zoom participant comes in and starts participating in the service or in the class or the whatever, that sound from Zoom that's being piped into the loudspeakers is picked up by the microphones, the in-house microphones that are not part of that mix minus. So they're then going back into Zoom. I just did an event last week, and all I did was I muted the in-house microphones in Zoom. I would just switch back and forth. Is that the way to handle this, or is there a better way?
Well, that is one way to handle it, yes. And sometimes you have to do that. So I would keep a finger on the microphone that is active at the time, and bring it down when Zoom is speaking. That's a method we call ducking. But what if there's more than one microphone open at it, at that time? So a few things to.
So what Marty, just to clarify, what I did is I didn't mute a microphone. I muted the whole sanctuary thing in Zoom.
Yeah, you can do that. So here's why you have that sort of feedback from the speakers to the microphones. And that is, it's important to keep this in mind when you're designing your system, installing your loudspeaker system. And I'm sure Jay can talk some about this as well. So what we want to do anytime we're setting up loudspeakers in a room where there are going to be microphones is we want to have those loudspeakers chosen specifically and positioned and aimed so that they are putting sound where the audience is, in this case, where the congregation is, and not up in other places where the sound can reflect off of walls and ceilings and bounce around and create a lot of reverberation in the room. We also want to avoid those speakers putting sound onto the bema or the chancel or the stage area where there are microphones. Because if we can have that area be a quiet zone, then the microphones won't be picking up the sound from the loudspeakers. And what you're talking about, David, becomes much less of a problem.
So you mentioned about the things and bringing in Jay and also bringing in John here. You've seen these events, or you've been installing these venues for a long time. With everything was based around the sound creation was there and the sound delivery was here. And now all of a sudden you've got a sound creation coming from somewhere else, which also needs to be heard by the person creating the sound. Jay, this must be like you're going, what hair you had left is gone.
My hair left my head long before we started doing streaming from sanctuaries. But so the thing that's really changed in the last in the last year and a half has been we've introduced well, actually maybe I should say what we're introducing now. So we're bringing unified communication, Zoom, whatever platform, into the sanctuary. We're having a real-time live event, and we're introducing the far end audio, where we want somebody at the far end of the conversation to be heard locally. We're also taking local audio we're sending back. So one of the things that we have to contend with now, and it's a tool, it's not our adversary, is something called acoustic echo cancellation. So this is intrinsic in terms of being able to have a conversation with somebody at the far end without having audio return as an echo. So one of the things I just want to remind you of. So most of the time, probably 90% of the time or more, we're using the echo canceller that's built into the soft codec. So for example, if you're using Zoom as your soft codec, Zoom is fully responsible for the echo cancellation. Echo cancelers have they really do have a finite limit of how much audio they can remove. And remember that the job of the echo canceller is to work so that when somebody talks to you from the far end, we don't send their speech back to them.
Yeah.
Because that would be perceived by them as an echo and everybody else on the call. If we are amplifying that audio from the far end greater than the capacity echo canceller to subtract it, you're going to go into a half duplex and an echo mode. So you do have limits to this. And it's just important to be cognizant of it, that you don't want to be in a position where we're amplifying that return audio or the inbound audio so loud that we can't cancel it and keep it from going to everybody at the other end of this hybrid call.
Yeah.
So bringing John on to this now, are you seeing the same, John Fiber?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to any broadcast and sound engineer for a TV event, if you ever go to an award show or something like that, very often the sound in the room is quite low compared to a gig or a concert, because they are really concerned about it going back into the broadcast and getting terrible. So I would say, we have to, Marty's right in that we have to tune the sound more than pumping it really loudly in your place of worship, because if you pump it too loudly, it's Zoom is not gonna handle it well. So it's about and this is the other nightmare that I think we have and we have to sort of fight against sometimes is that some places of worship have kind of a multi-purpose aspect to them. So, you know, traditionally they might have done one service one way and another service the other way. And this makes it even harder for us now going forward with hybrid events. We used to have on our bimmer in our shul, a little bimmer that pulled out and came further out, sort of slightly in front of the loudspeakers. And now I think, you know, that will cause a lot of problems. So we are just going to stick to the top bimmer where we know it sounds fine, and you know, so I think it's about keeping it down in the room as much as you can.
That's a really interesting comment. From listening to what Marty's talked about, what Jay's talked about, what you've talked about there, John, you're suddenly sort of going and thinking, hold on, this was perfect. It's been running for this long time this way. And suddenly we've introduced a load of people which are basically ruining the sound in the room, because we've got to make sure that their sound is as good. And not only that, we want to include them in. And I know when I start talking with David about this roomers versus Zoomers, he has a lot of views of how that comes together. So it is super complex, but achievable. Marty, can I throw it back to you and we can carry on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So there's an acoustic issue here. So, and acoustics in a room are super important. Any sound system, any loudspeaker system, you know, there's two components. There's the sound that the loudspeaker puts out is capable on its own, but that sound is going into an acoustic space, which is then going to modify that sound in a certain way. And in many sanctuaries, the effect of that is reverberation. And there are many different kinds of loudspeakers that emit sound in patterns, based referencing the box of the sound of the loudspeaker itself. And we can, based on the shape of the sanctuary, the shape of the seating area, and where the loudspeakers are positioned in three-dimensional space, we can direct sound down to where the people are and avoid all that sound reflecting off of walls and ceilings, which cuts down on reverberation. And in particular, the back wall, if the back wall the back wall is typically a large reflector. So if there's sound from the loudspeakers hitting that back wall, that sound is going to come back to the pulpit area, right? And so
what you're saying is you really wouldn't want to deal with a fully circular building at all, would you? But maybe we'll come on to that a bit later.
Yeah, we should take a look at that at some point. You know, circular buildings, circular sanctuaries. We have run into some of that. You've got a great demonstration and great video of that.
We'll come on to that in a minute.
Yep.
Okay. We've got quite a few questions in the box there,
Yeah,
Mark.
there are some good questions.
I just want to start asking some questions, and these are for anybody in the room if you can answer. I know there's going to be this one. I'm looking. I know somebody who's going to come over this one straight away. Question from Yuval Karen: what are the benefits of a digital mixer over an analog one?
I mean,
yeah, John.
Firstly, you know, for my money, they're much more flexible, possibly more complicated, but the great benefit is that you can save scenes. You can set everything up exactly how you want it, and you can save it, and then you can recall it. And if someone comes and fiddles with it, you can restore it. But you know, lot more options in terms of effects and routing. You can send different signals, different places. You can change the inputs. It's harder to get your head around when you're starting, but so much more flexible.
Jay, I knew this is a question that you want to bring up.
I've been a fan of digital mixing from the beginning, and maybe that's because I used to haul around very large analog mixers and outboard effect racks from the mid 70s on. So among the benefits, to the point of being able to store and recall settings, that's huge. Having all the processing on board, That's huge. The routing can be preset. What else is really great about analog mixers, or I'm sorry, digital mixers over analog mixers, is that you can limit the amount of control to specific people who are going to operate it. So I'm going to assume that this is a universal worldwide problem, that everybody who has volunteers helping to execute a service in their synagogue or sanctuary, some are going to be very skillful. They read the console manual. They know how to get the most out of everything. They have a good ear. They're attentive to what's happening on the bima, etc. And you're going to have some people who are challenged to operate a couple of faders and turn channels on and off. It's a huge advantage to be able to limit the access to the inner workings of the console to the skill set of the person who's operating it. And I think that is that, and what that also does is it lets you save your presets, whatever you've created for your standard settings. You don't want somebody overwriting them by accident. I've run into that. That's why we also back these up onto like USB sticks and lock them away as well. So
I think everybody's nodding their heads. I'm just going to ask a quick question back on to you, Jay, just a follow-up question that's come in from Yuval before I go to David. Can a mix minus be achieved by an analog mixer?
Sure, as long as the analog mixer has auxiliary sends that are variable. So the very simplest analog mixers could be something like anything like a rack mount powered mixer from a company like Toa, and that really only has one or two outputs at most. You don't have individual sends. So as long as your analog mixer has at least one auxiliary send that you can use to route signal to a separate output from the main PA, you can do a mix minus. And fortunately, even the least expensive of analog mixers these days probably have at least two auxiliary sends available, sometimes a lot more than that.
David?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but for me, one of the biggest benefits of a digital mixer is that you can go direct into a computer via USB often, that it doesn't require an audio interface. Is that correct?
Yeah, Oren?
Well, yes, and many analog mixers now come with a built-in USB interface. In our small sanctuary where we're streaming most of the time, we have a relatively small analog simple Behringer mixer that goes straight into the computer with a USB cable. And for that specific purpose, super simple. Honestly, in the main sanctuary where we have the big X18 or X16, I don't even remember, it's been a while, interfacing it to a computer is much more powerful, but much more complex, because you can.
Sorry, go on. Well, I was going to say that what we've got to think about, what everybody's got to think about long term. At the moment, the complexity is, Zoom in the people in the room and Zoom, but then you start getting down to, we want to play a video. So where's the video coming from? And how do we make sure that people in the room can hear that as well as the people remote? And then we want to bring something else in. And then we may or may not start looking at things like using OBS Ninja, which is an ability to bring somebody in as a single camera, or vMix Call, or Ecamm. I can't remember what it's called. It's gone off my mind, but they've all got
interview, the interview mode.
Yeah, exactly. And all of a sudden you're having a source that is another source, and it's bringing those in. And I think absolutely, my view is absolutely you can do everything with an analog mixer. I think, though, the complexity of where these things are going, and maybe when you start looking at the facts that you were talking about, effects, about locking off people, bringing, so that we don't end up blowing people's ears out when somebody walks in, or which you can control at your end. So even if someone's super loud on Zoom, we can potentially bring them down and do things like that. I think that's where there's some potential advantages, or long term on the digital side.
Yeah, Leo, you bring up a really good point, because while there are as Oren said, there are some hybrid mixers that have come out. They're analog mixers with digital interfaces in them. Oftentimes those interfaces are fairly limited. They'll take the main output and have it, a 2-channel digital interface to a computer, but then it makes it difficult to do mix minuses that way, because you can't get outputs from your buses. But all these additional inputs that you just referenced that we don't think about normally is like, you may have 2 or 3 people that are coming in from Zoom from different places, plus you'll have video clips that you'll want to play back. And if these are, coming from one, a second computer, you may have a situation where you'll be playing one thing back, and then you want to check your second thing to make sure that it's queued up properly or something, or make sure your audio level is good while your first thing is happening. And if you're doing that on the same computer, you really can't, because you'll be interrupting the audio that's leaving from there. And so you need to have these on separate audio channels, and then if you're doing this by analog, having that come out of the computer to an interface and then split to multiple channels, and then having analog wiring going to the mixer gets really, really complicated.
So I want to move on.
Digital,
Yep.
It becomes much simpler.
Go on, Marty.
Yeah,
Okay.
If you're doing this all in digital, then you can route things over the digital network and not have to worry about all these extra wires and things. Once you get it set up, it's much simpler to operate. You have a cleaner desk because you don't have this whole mess of wiring, and everything can be on its own channel, and the organization becomes much cleaner.
Okay. We've got a lot of questions building up, and we've also got another session after this. This for everybody watching, this is the subject we knew could go on a long time. It is also a subject, it's probably the most critical bit. I think everybody, whenever you talk about it, everybody talks about cameras first because it's the thing they can see. But cameras are the thing where you either can see it works or it doesn't. It's pretty straightforward. It's either you can see me or you can't see me. Audio, it isn't. You're sitting there, you never know, you're not sure. And we've all made mistakes of forgetting to record something, muting somebody out. I don't know if anybody hasn't pressed the mute all and then realized they've muted their rabbi, you haven't run a service, because I think literally every single person that's ever done it has muted the rabbi at least once. The fact is, you knew what they were going to tell you anyway, so we can go on. Question in here from JLo. Do you want to read out your question?
Sure. In my experience when mixing live sound is that you want to focus on the only thing that's happening at the time, and hopefully that in a service that's typically only one thing. There's either someone at the pulpit or there's someone at a microphone playing a guitar, and typically you would mute every other mic in the room when that's happening. Is that still something, and can that help with this the echo cancellation that could potentially happen?
John Fiber.
I mean, it'll certainly sound better. If you have different microphones at different locations and they're all on, you're going to get much more ambience in the room. You can get phase cancellation from the different microphones. It's always better if you can to have the one microphone on. For instance, the classic one for sound engineers is a panel debate when you've got 6 people wearing lavaliers and you try and put them all up. And it feeds back immediately. Now we have auto mix and all sorts of things, but it's always better to have the fewer sources if you've only got one person talking, for my money. Anyway.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, the next question we have is from Douglas Carmichael. Is there an outboard echo cancellation unit that can be interfaced digitally into a console?
The answer is yes, there are, but the answer can be more complex than that. So I'm going to take you to the paradigm of in the early days of video conferencing, we had a single channel echo canceller. Usually an analog microphone mixer would mix all the microphones, that are going to go to the far end. They'll go through the echo canceller. And what was discovered early on, I want to say probably back in the late 1990s, was it's every microphone is going to hear the far end audio coming from the loudspeakers from a different position or perspective. And best practices became you want an echo canceller per microphone. Now, we've kind of, depending on Zoom, which generally is designed for a single microphone. I'm sitting in my studio or in my office at my desk. I've either got a microphone in my video camera, I've got a separate microphone in my laptop, whatever it is. It only ever has to worry about one microphone. That microphone doesn't ever move. It doesn't move around the room. So the answer is yes, you can buy multi-channel echo cancellers. Interfacing those with digital mixing consoles is absolutely possible. It can get expensive if you go with the echo canceller per channel, and you'll also need to use some routing bandwidth from probably the easiest way to do it these days would be if you were to do it via Dante. Is it necessary? Probably not if you're only sporadically, having two-way dialogue in your sanctuary sporadically. I mean, if it's not something that is happens all the time, where you've got multiple endpoints and sites coming in for real-time conversation, the single echo canceller in Zoom is probably good 80% of the time. But the answer is yes, it's possible.
I would agree that everything is possible. The reality is the window that digital mixers that particularly have come out now has opened up is that they're putting an incredible amount of power and an incredible amount of effects and other areas that you will need in a reasonable price. Now there's always different mixers, and there's different quality and there's different things that will work for different people, but it's amazing what you can actually get in a digital mixer now for
There's
the price.
one thing you can't get, Leo.
Go on. You can't get the brain.
Nobody makes a live sound mixer with echo cancellation on board.
Right. The only thing I would say as well, it's something you can talk to about your service leaders about. We were talking to someone recently. Things like responsive readings are not great. Is not a great. If you can avoid doing one line from one person, one line in the room, one person, then avoid it. That will make your life so much easier if you can get whoever's contributing from Zoom to do a paragraph or whatever. And it's just simple things like that. And then if you have to, as David said, you can just mute Zoom. Mute the input to Zoom while someone else is speaking from outside. It's really easy. But if they're insisting on responsive reading, it's going to be tough, I think.
We've hijacked. I'm going to pass it back to Marty because we've hijacked in the middle of your stuff, Marty. If there was stuff you wanted to finish on this, and we'll go on from there.
Well, just a couple of points. You notice that a lot of people here on the panel are wearing headphones or in-ear monitors. And why are we doing that? Because we want to be able to shut off the loudspeakers. My loudspeakers are right over there. My microphone is here. We want to be able to kill that. That's the way we kill that feedback loop, is by wearing in-ear monitors. Now, you see a lot of musicians on stage wearing in-ear monitors too, and that's so that they can avoid having loud sounds from floor monitors. In-ear monitors can eliminate the floor monitors that are in front of them. Or sometimes there are floor monitors there anyway, because you see musicians taking their ears out sometimes. So that's one way of cutting the feedback loop, and it's kind of a very similar method to positioning the loudspeakers, as I was talking about earlier, and making the BEMA be a quiet zone. The other thing is, and this goes towards the kind of a hybrid between external echo cancellation and hitting the mute button. There's maybe a medium there, a way to compromise, is that in many consoles, you can affect the dynamic range or put a compressor on the bus that feeds out to Zoom, and have that busser that have that compressor activated by an external signal source.
So I know that JLo is going to jump straight in here and say, Marty, tell everybody what a compressor is.
Okay.
And a bus.
Yeah,
And a
I'm not
bus.
afraid to
Oh.
ask those questions. That's why I'm here.
That's right. She keeps us on track. She keeps us honest. Okay, so a bus. Well, so a mixer has multiple outputs, and each of those outputs is referred to as a bus, or the way that we route sound in a console out to different outputs is by routing them to different buses. So a console will have a limited number of buses, a defined number of buses, and you can route any input to any bus, or you can route an input to multiple buses. But the idea is
I think we're going to get too deep.
A compressor.
A compressor.
A compressor is a way to modify the dynamic range of an audio signal. So I can talk really, really loud, and I can also talk in a whisper. And the difference between the lowest level of my voice, the lowest volume level, and the loudest volume level is called the dynamic range. And so when Jay is speaking, his microphone is a bit lower.
Marty, I've put the meters up so that you can do that again. Hopefully that people can see that the meters are up now.
Because you do use a compressor on your voice.
You've got a compressor in. I haven't got a compressor. So if I shout loud, you'll see I go straight up. Marty, do the same.
All right. So now I'm talking very, very softly, and I am coming up at a -28. Now, Jay, why don't you give us something?
Okay, so I do have a compressor in my signal chain, and my compressor's working right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my compressor out of circuit. I'm going to talk when I hit the button in and out. Let me know if you hear a difference. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We should also see a difference in the meters. 1, 2. Now the compressor's back in circuit, and I can also increase the amount of compression. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You noting a difference in my levels?
Yes.
And you may have to, David. You may have to put us on gallery view for this, so that people can see it on the.
Okay. And so now I've taken the compressor out of my signal, and so now I can speak rather softly. And if I speak this softly, I'm hitting a -33, -34, and in this case, the more minus, the lower the signal, right? And so now I can speak really, really loud, and I can come up to a -17, which is so much louder than a -34, -18. Now, I'm going to put the compressor in, and the compressor is not going to let me go above -22, 23, because maybe I can show you this. Hang on, let me see if I can show this.
Don't worry if you can't. Don't worry if you can't.
We can hear the difference.
We can hear the difference. We can hear the difference.
You're squashing the dynamic range. It's so that you can be loud, you can be soft, and it's all in a relatively.
So I think we've covered what it does. Go on, Jay.
Yeah, no. So I guess want to go back to what Marty's initial point was, that you could, so a compressor can either act on the level of signal coming directly into it, or you can have a separate input to what's called the level detector and sidechain it. And the way the sidechain would work is you could take the Zoom feed that's coming into your mixing console, send that to the sidechain of the compressor. So the compressor will only compress when somebody is talking from the far end, and you could use that to reduce the level you're sending back to them. So
kind of like a ducker, yeah.
Yeah, it would be exactly like a ducker.
Yeah, very much like a ducker.
Right, and what that does is it pushes you into a half duplex mode. So only one person really could talk at a time, like a walkie-talkie. Good echo cancellation ensures that two people can talk to each other simultaneously. Now, just from a management point of view, it's really hard when two people are talking to each other at once, nobody's really listening. it's really a bad way to conduct any kind of a dialogue where you're having an information exchange. So I would simply say that as to those of you who produce worship events, either locally or remotely, it's really important to make sure that people have good meeting hygiene and they don't do things like talk over each other during a meeting. And those are.
And I'm going to try not to
It's more
talk over you.
etiquette than
But
hygiene.
Can I just throw?
I'm going to
can I
ask
just
David.
throw in
David,
here?
you've got a question. Yeah.
Well, it's not a question. I just want to, as a rabbi, I can tell you that everything that was just said, as interesting as it was, whew, like I have to write a Devar Torah. I have to write my sermon. I don't have time for compression. What I think that we might want to shift to is what are the tools or the things or the simple solutions that we can use to have this done for us? Because not only do I not have time, I also don't have the money to hire someone to do it for me.
Okay, John Iddleson.
Okay, my professorness will come out, and hopefully this will be simple because all of us sort of need some decompression when you get all this stuff into it. The difference between a compressor and a limiter is the compression ratio. If you think of a limiter, it's supposed to limit the maximum level. And the advantage of a limiter, I taught it to my broadcaster students, is that you're not going to blast somebody's ear out. But the compressor has a different ratio, and what it does is essentially decreases the dynamic range. It's a dynamic control. So typically, you're going to have some sort of limiter on your system if you're going to have a lot of people grabbing the mic at different levels, because you don't want to pop somebody's ear out. But at a certain point, you want to make sure you have the greatest clarity. And some settings of a compressor can help improve the signal transfer. Marty's eyes are rolling. I know I sort of simplified, but that's the way I try to explain to my students.
I think, as David said, sometimes you do have to go deep. And I think this is where we knew we would get into some things. But the idea is we've got to work out, people can't tell you what's the problem, but what they can tell you in sound is they either ignore you because they never tell you, they don't actually notice it, or they tell you every single time the sound went wrong. That's all you ever hear on the sound side. They always tell you when the sound went wrong. Did you know it was making that noise then? Or I couldn't hear it, or this, that, and the other. And what we're trying to do is work out so that this critical thing is when you have got people remote, and we're going to come onto this in the second section very soon, is how, when you've got people remote and you've got people in the room, how do we make sure that people at both ends of that thing can actually hear anything? And I think we've covered, unless you want to cover some more stuff, Marty, I think we've covered most of their points.
Just very quickly, Leo, sorry. I really, that thing about, I love that concept, Jay, of hygiene at meetings and stuff. And I think David, it is about keeping things as simple as possible. And also, I'm running an event tomorrow, a Zoom bar mitzvah thing. And one of my biggest tools, I'm there at the venue. It's in someone's garden. I've got the camera set up. I've got whatever. I've got someone remotely on Zoom by WhatsApp telling me how it sounds, because it's almost impossible for me to know. And it's the most useful thing I think you can have is someone remotely who you can just have your phone, whatever, there and say, you're a bit loud. Because I might be loud now, I don't know. It's really hard to tell, especially when you're in the room. So if you can have someone, that's a big tool.
I want to quickly go to John Edelson, and then I've got...
I'll ditto Jonathan. Ears in the field can't be replaced. But I want to point out all those things you were talking about. When Zoom does it, it's pretty amazing. So if you turn off original sound to see what happens. So a rule that I have is let Zoom do as much of it as possible. So David's answer, if you could fix it so Zoom's doing it and it's canceling and doing all that, it gets confusing when you bring somebody in directly and their echo delay is different. But if you're using Zoom for most of it, then you could focus on where you have an issue. You have somebody who's a remote guest who has to be heard clearly. Then it narrows it. If you try to fix everybody's through all these other mixed minuses and adjustments and whatever, I go crazy doing it. I'm an analog cowboy in a digital world. I liked it when I had knobs that you could turn. But And I didn't go digital early on because the digital sampling rates weren't better than my ears. But now the digital systems are better than I'm ever going to hear, and probably better than the noise I had in my analog systems.
Okay, last quick point, Joe, before we move on. J-Lo.
2 points, sorry. Just to address what David was saying, I would love for there to be a simple solution, but oftentimes it's just not simple. It is complicated, and thus the value of audio engineers. That's the value we bring. Perhaps you can get a digital console, then you can get everything set up, and it becomes easier week after week to duplicate what you're doing if you do it right once. The other thing that I was gonna say, now it's out of my head.
Move on. We're gonna.
Well,
You come back. We'll come back to you at the end.
Go.
While you're thinking about
Okay.
that, there's something interesting that I heard between what David was saying and what Jonathan was saying. So, David is speaking as a rabbi up on the bima, and he's conducting the service. Jonathan is a sound guy, and he is out in the audience with the equipment. So, not really David's role to think about echo cancellation and compression and
But the problem is that it is.
But you've
The
taken
problem
it
is
off.
that, I mean, for us small synagogues, small town rabbis, whatever, we don't have a sound guy. We don't even have someone to run Zoom. We're it.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna, guys. We're gonna have to move on to the second part, or we're gonna go on to this for a long time. And we'll come back round. I'd like to introduce who I introduced earlier, Sue. Sue, if you're there, great. Sue, tell me in an American term, the curveball you threw us about 3 weeks ago.
Okay, so yeah, I've been listening to all of these since the beginning. And what happened was our rabbi was leaving. Originally, it was going to be a total Zoom service. And she threw me the curveball that she said, okay, I now want it a hybrid service. I want to be in person and outside. And I thought, wow, this is way above my ability. So I phoned Leo via LinkedIn and said, Leo, help. We now need to run a hybrid service in a synagogue. It's a round building. It's a bit like the Royal Albert Hall. The sound is bad at places, and we need some really good sound equipment. And up to then, to be honest, listening to what we said earlier, our whole service had been geared around, even though we were doing hybrid, to make it a really good experience in Zoom. And to be honest, we just turned all the mics off in the sanctuary, and the people in the sanctuary were left to fend for themselves if they couldn't hear. So that was a challenge I threw down to Leo.
So unfortunately your audio is dropping out slightly there, but I'm gonna just give you. I've got a recording of the service, so just to explain, if any of you missed what Sue was saying, the building is 360 degrees, completely round, made out of concrete walls with nothing on them, or painted. So you stand in the middle, you say your name, and you hear it about 10 minutes later still echoing in your ears. So it's that sort of building. And we knew that we had people coming in remote. People were taking part in the active service remote. That's really, really key. The people who were in the room, and I think it was just under 30, I can't remember exactly, had to be able to hear the people who were remote. And we literally turned on, up until that point, it'd all been a PC with Zoom with a pair of speakers so the rabbi could actually hear them, but the fact that nobody else could hear in the room wasn't a super importance, and that changed. So I'm going to try and show you a little bit of the video here. I'm going to try. JLo's going to shout at me because I'm probably going to jump too much backwards and forwards, but I'm going to try and see if I can show you some salient points of this video.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and a very
Hopefully you can hear it.
Welcome to our service this morning. Welcome to everybody here in Shul.
So I'm just going to stop there really quickly. So this is Rabbi Lisa, and you'll see on front of her, she actually had the Facebook portal, this one here, that we used. For those of you who haven't heard, the reason we use the Facebook portal is it takes any Zoom call and jumps it up to 720p. So it's worth doing. Also, it gave her an ability to see the people who are remote, which in the past she hasn't really worried about, but the queuing aspect was massive. She could actually see when she could talk to people and when she could talk back, because she could actually see them. So that is really important, that you make sure your rabbi can actually see the people in the remotely.
And how exciting it is to see people in person. I'm delighted that.
And so I'm going to move forward a little bit, and you'll see that we had another desk. This is their cantor singing, and he's singing, and we've got there. What actually you can see very sneakily in the corner is you can actually see Sue in the bottom right-hand corner of that screen. And Sue was doing all the Zoom switching. One of the things we decided definitely not to do was to interfere with the people who were already knowledgeable about how the service ran, who was normally going to be doing what, who needed to be muted and unmuted. Also, just for interest, if you're interested on this Zoom, I can actually mute and unmute everybody in here now, because they fixed the fault that there was in the past. If you update to the latest version of Zoom and tick the allow to remotely unmute and mute, you can actually now, as a service leader, control who you mute and unmute. So you don't have to just say ask to unmute. You can actually unmute them, but they have to give you permission. So coming through, we then had this part here. This is all remote. This is Mitch, who is a brilliant singer, singing remotely. And everybody in the room could hear Mitch. Sue, if you can hear us, what was the sound? What was it like hearing Mitch in the room?
Well, everybody said the sound was fantastic. I mean, it was just chalk and cheese to what we had before.
And we'll cover how we changed that and what we did in a second. So we came through the bit that JLo, I'm going to try and show you, which I know you wanted to see, is a transition. Okay, hopefully this is going to transition.
Elohei olam, berachamecha harabim rachem aleinu, Adon nuzeinu, tzu miskabenu, magen yishenu, miskav ba'adenu.
I've probably gone back to...
Chadash al Zion.
Hold on, let me go forward. That's it.
You skipped right through it.
I did. I skipped right through it. I thought she was going to be talking for longer than that on there. But what we actually had is that we had sections, and going back to something that John said earlier, there were clear, defined sections of where the people in the room were doing something and the people in the remote were doing it. Very little of trying to do both at the same time, because both at the same time, as he said, becomes confusing. During this service, Sue, how many people took part or were actively taking part in the service?
Around 15 people.
So it's quite a big active amount of congregants taking part. Oren or David, how many people would you normally have in a service remotely taking part as well? I don't know if they can hear me.
I usually have up to I mean, taking participants, I have about 30,
Participants.
But not all of them are doing readings. I mean, sometimes what I'll often do is when we get to the prayer for healing, I'll invite people to unmute and share the names of loved ones.
Okay.
But I know that that's going to be
No, I'm talking about the actual taking part, doing a mitzvah, doing something, doing a blessing or something like that. And you'll see, so we go through and you can see there was quite a lot of people. Now, this was an interesting part. In musically or sound wise, in a funny way, it's a disaster, but you'll see. So I've forgotten her name, the lady sitting there, Sue. I'm going to tell
Leo, this recording is from Zoom, correct? So
this recording is actually taken from Facebook and Zoom. Yes, it is.
Okay, so this is not a recording of what it sounded like in the room. It's
no, it isn't. It isn't that. So Jackie, we were told Jackie's going to be at this mic, but as you can see, Jackie's got a crutch. Jackie didn't stand at the mic, but we should be able to hear what she sounds like.
We rise for the
Jump to the
Amida
end
on
of it.
page
Sorry.
200.
But what we thought was going to be a big problem actually benefited us greatly. As I said, this building is round. So acoustically, everything echoes off the walls. So arguably, any microphone placed anywhere in this room will pick up quite a lot of the sound. And so we were getting the reverb that you're hearing. And you can hear it in this anyway, that you're hearing a lot of reverb.
22.
Yeah, we hear the a little bit of the room, but the microphones themselves are pretty clear. So, but what does this room actually look like, Leo? Do you have any pictures?
Okay, so if I go right to the end, and I'm going to have to just catch this just near the end. So they did. There was a lot of singing right at the end, but I'm just gonna. I haven't got very fine control on this, so you're just gonna have to bear with me. It's not as good a control as I'd like. Jump. Okay, so this is coming down. There's the near to mid, and we're going to come off this. There you go. So that shows you the room and the layout, and from here you can see what we've actually got is 2 screens either side for the congregation to be able to see the people on Zoom, and you can see it's reflecting back in there. I showed you the screen that the rabbi, she was looking at. We had the microphones so if you look at this, if you think of this as a clock, and the top of it is 12 o'clock, at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock were the 2 other microphones for people in the room that we were using to pick up, and at 6 o'clock was where we were sitting with the cameras. And you can see it's beautiful around. The roof is there, and it echoes out. Does that answer?
Just to say, there is because I wasn't present at this, but I have visited this place, and it's beautiful. But there's a spot just near the middle where you get about 20 different reverberation sort of delays coming back at you. It's quite incredible. And again, it's one of those places. If you push the level of the speakers in the room, it's all over.
So I just want to show you what we did to set this up. And this sort of plays back from some of the things that Marty was talking about earlier. So Marty talked about the theoretical, and here it is in practice. So the room we ended up doing is we put in a digital mixer, an XR18. Because of the way that so all the microphones, as you can see, are connected up here into the XR18. So we've got 4 different microphones coming into this, which is the digital mixer. That digital mixer is then feeding everybody in the room through an amplifier and the speakers. The amplifier and speakers we never touch. They're the ones that are there. To bring in the stuff from the MacBook Pro, which is how I was bringing in Zoom, we're taking the sound coming out of the MacBook Pro and into a little mixer sitting next to me. And the little mixer sitting next to me is this one here, which is called a Flow 8. Now, if you were doing this for a full installation, we probably wouldn't recommend a separate mixer for the Zoom. But because I was in one end of the room, Andy was in the other, as we just talked about the acoustics of the building, if I said anything even quietly to Andy, everybody in the room hears you. Because everything you say, I don't know how you get away with it, Sue. When some of your congregants fall asleep, you must be able to hear them everywhere. It just anything you say in that room is heard. So what I was doing is I was taking the audio from Zoom, which is that blue line you can see there, is coming to my Flow 8, and from the Flow 8, I'm sending it back to Andy, who is sitting over the other side on that link there. So how was I doing that? What's the bit? This comes back to the thing that Marty talked about. On the Flow 8 enables me to create 2 separate mixes. The standard mix of things coming in, going out to the speakers and going out to the USB. But the second thing is the monitoring. So it would literally pretending I'm monitoring something, as if when he was talking about band members are sitting there. So I took from the monitor, and the monitor that I send back to the sound guy, Andy, was literally only the stuff coming from Zoom. So I was able to separate the 2 things. then Andy was sitting there on the XR18 and he was dynamically mixing out and controlling that, because it was an important service and it was pretty busy. He was literally having to as Marty called it, ducking. He was ducking this microphone so it wouldn't pick up, was doing something. Now, the bit going back to something that Jonathan said that was we should have said, but we didn't in advance. One of the difficulties we had is Rabbi Lisa likes to sing along, but she's singing along about a second later than everything else. So quietly, Andy had to duck her out, because otherwise she was being heard about a second later to everything else that was going into the room or the things that were going there. And it's just something you have to get used to, because in the past, rabbis will sing to the choir that's in the room, but if the choir is remote and people are actually in the room and they're hearing it, it's quite off-putting, because she wouldn't know she's doing it until you're hearing it coming out. Because one of the other things that you have to do, which we haven't explained, is that the cameras come in a little bit slower than the audio that you're hearing. Cameras are always a bit slower, the picture, because you can't. So it means that to get the lip sync to work, you actually have to slow the audio down. And in this case, it was about 230 milliseconds. Why is that important? Well, going back to the thing that John Ittleson was saying about how Zoom does its sort of things, when you're slowing the sound down to match the picture that you're sending, you've now added a delay, which is now going to cause even more of a delay if you then allow the sound in the room.
You mean delaying, Leo? You don't mean slowing down the voice, obviously.
Thank you. Yeah. Slow it, delaying it. Good. Thank you for correcting my wrong use of terminology in there. So it comes to be quite complex. Sue, turning back to you. I think the synagogue was happy.
Oh, we're delighted. I mean, as I say, up until that point, we really ignored those in the synagogue. They had a poor sound. And this time, everybody in the synagogue were absolutely thrilled. They could hear everything. Everything was really good. So it was amazing. We have nothing but praise.
There must be, we're getting some questions in here, but I'm also going to ask the panelists here if they've got some questions for what we did and their thoughts on how that meets to some of the things that you're going to be doing coming up soon. John.
I've got one.
Oh, Sue. Well, let me start with John. No, Sue, you've got a question.
Yeah, how am I going to do the ducting to remove the rabbi when they're singing along going forward?
Well, I think the first thing is you tell her or him, whoever's your new rabbi, but just explain. It's amazing what they could do if they just lip sync along rather than sing. But it is going to be something you're going to have to adjust. John, you had a question.
Well, talking about lip syncing, I was told to do that any group I've been singing in, so that's a whole nother story. I think the interesting thing, and you just touched it at the end there, is that the camera video is slower than the audio, so you have to slow down the audio. And you think that's not a big deal, but it turns out psychologically that's even a bigger deal, because light travels faster than sound. So we're used to, in big halls, seeing the person on the stage singing and hearing the sound slightly later, like the flash of lightning and then the crack of the lightning, and you know how far away you are. So when we get out of sync because of the speed of the audio or versus the video, sometimes it's even worse than it really is, because our minds are having a hard time wrapping around it. With a circular space like that, short of designing, I mean, we have people who know how to make stadiums work, so you don't have the hello. But that's the sort of thing you'd have to, I think, do in that space to be able to actually make it work. And I don't think it could be done even, probably.
I think when I showed this building to Jay, it's like you're not going to get him on any aeroplane to come over and fix that sound. It was quite. It's challenging. It's challenging.
Well, I try to think of the creative way to figure out where the hot spot is, so you can have people specifically there and be amplified. Yeah,
Generally, the hot
figure out where the
spot's
sweet
right in the
spot is.
center.
I didn't hear you, Jay.
Yeah.
I said the hot spot is right in the center of the room. That's really where everything focuses back. And certainly you have a whispering gallery effect when you have a completely curved space. Even quiet speech at the back of the room is going to travel around the room. And acoustical treatment would certainly go a long way to helping that space out. But that's only going to work, for certain frequencies. It's not going to be full bandwidth.
So my takeaways, and I'd be interested what Sue thought, is that there were two things. One, by leaving Sue and her team in charge of the Zoom side, the unmuting, muting, and the flow of the service worked really well. It's not like we're talking about a West End production where every single cue was dead on time. It's not what we need. I never think that's what service is about. I think it's about having a gradual thing where it's like it's not too long and it's not too short. I think we said to Rabbi Lisa to take a pause every time she threw the baton to the other end. 3 seconds, wasn't it? It's 3 seconds. Pause 3 seconds before you start pressing the, it's all gone wrong, we can't hear them, unmute. Because it does take a few seconds for people to pick up. But it was a service, and it was a really successful service, and it was a meaningful service, and it felt spiritual. It felt like a service used to feel like. It just happens that some of the people doing blessings didn't happen to be in the room. And that was it was actually quite amazing. Maybe it was also helped by the fact that it was my first in-person Kiddush, and so there was loads of food at the end. So that always makes things better. Any other questions or things from the in the room before I go out? Yes, Rabbi David. You're on mute. I can unmute you.
I know. Trying to find myself. I can't spotlight myself.
It's because I'm wearing this shirt. This shirt's to celebrate the fact we have summer here today. So I thought I'd put on a summer shirt.
I like it. Mine is sort of an audio question, but so at your suggestion, I got the Facebook portal and I log in now with every meeting that I do. But one of the things I've discovered is that I can't disconnect audio in Zoom on the Facebook portal. So what I end up doing is I join for a second, there's terrible noise until I can press the mute and the turn off video button and turn the volume down. Is there a way to disconnect audio so that I'm just using that as a monitor?
No, there isn't, but you can if you keep pushing the buttons on the left-hand side far enough down, and then it comes up on the screen and pull both of them across. But also turn off the camera and turn on the top of it. Turn the camera and the thing that it does successfully work. Just be aware, and we did run into this. It is chewing up bandwidth. So if you have the Facebook portal and another 2 or 3 things, at points we were getting very close to the limits of the bandwidth that they had at the synagogue, and we're putting in a second line, or Sue's looking for a second line there to fix that. Other questions in the panel before I go to other questions we have outside? Is that a question, Jay? Marty?
No, let's take some questions.
Great. Sue, it was great. It was a delight, that building. And we talked about the building aside, the actual service and everything else that worked. I just think it really worked.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add about that building, it's a beautiful space, and I'm sure it's like, everybody loves it. It's very valuable to the congregation. And I wouldn't want to change it aesthetically, So there are 2 things that I would think about to improve the acoustics of the space, are perhaps some acoustic treatment that can, as close as possible, match the wall surface, because we can do that with the fabric on like absorption panels can be selected to match the surface of the wall, so they become nearly invisible. The other thing is upgrading the loudspeakers to be more intentional about speakers that work in that kind of a space. I'm thinking about, have you ever been up to a planetarium? A planetarium is a round room with a domed ceiling, which is like acoustic nightmare. Very close to something like what you're working with. But what they do is they have loudspeakers that are mounted around the room, around the upper part of the ceiling. They're pointed down into where the audience sits from all around, and they're very directional speakers. So they don't reflect off of the opposite walls, and they don't reflect off the ceiling. That could be, and now you wouldn't do it completely all around because you have the beam up at one end, but it's just one example of how a round room can be accomplished. And because you have more than two speakers, you can have the volume of any one of those speakers. All the volumes are down lower because the speakers are closer to where the people are sitting. And so you can play at a lower level. And so that could be a way to cut down on the reverberation of the room as well.
Sue, just go back to you before we go on to our other questions. I think Sue's wireless has completely died on us. I think she said thank you, but I'm not. I think that's what she said. Okay, I've got some questions that we've got in the. No, can't. Dead. Right. First question: is there a way to recommend certain Zoom settings for Zoomies, like to be sure that echo cancellation is set correctly? John.
Yeah, I think the standard setting of Zoom, not using the original sound. I think the other thing you could do is let people know that they can test their sound in Zoom. Under the next to the microphone, it has a thing that says audio settings, but about 4 spaces up there, it says test speaker and microphone. And that really does help for people to test it beforehand.
And this ties into the question that's later on in the box too, is that I think it's important to take anybody who's going to be contributing to the service through what those settings should be. And for instance, I use the low echo cancellation setting and walk them through, and so you can hear how they sound ahead of time. They can check their settings, and everyone can be sure that no one's going to come in like gangbusters, right?
Yeah.
I think this is sort of says what Dave has. You know, it is true when you go to advanced in audio, you can say how much noise cancellation you want, and you could get it from almost no noise cancellation to where I had a jackhammer outside and I was able to speak without hearing it. Now, my audio quality changed, but yeah, Zoom really has fixed the audio. And that's why I say whatever setting they have, if that works for you, unless you have an audio engineer, that's probably going to be better than what Jonathan's, nodding his head. It's probably going to be better than what you could do unless you have really good gear.
I think our big enemy on all these Zoom things is the iPad, because it's much harder to use them. People are you're looking up people's noses. The audio is generally terrible, and
that's what's, I think Sue's on an iPad or an iPhone, and that's where we're
I think the apps are terrible as well. Definitely have to be at a desktop for Zoom.
But yeah, it's. I think some of the points that you've brought up there are really important. Is making sure that the people who are taking who are the main contributors to a service, that you've actually tested them. I mean, when we do a live event, on majority of our live events, we want people on 20 minutes before.
Oh, at least 20 minutes before, if not even the day before, to run through.
We do a test before. Yeah.
If David is the only person doing that, then maybe you do need to do that a good amount of time before the service to make sure everybody's prepped.
I was just going to say, David, sorry to interrupt, but is there no one? I mean, I know it's hard to find people, but like a student or someone that you could ask to help for not, that's the first place I would look at, the local tech colleges, the audio, if there's any audio schools or whatever. I don't know.
Right. So this is actually something that is really being discussed in at least in my circles is, should it be professional people? Should it be volunteers? So one of the things that I'm working on doing is starting a cadre of Torah techies that people can say, hey, I have a service, or I have the annual meeting or whatever. I need this because we don't have to necessarily, at least for the Zoom piece, be on site. I just really wanted to focus. Sorry. Having someone who really is trained and knows how to facilitate a Zoom meeting with the muting, the unmuting, the spotlighting, the pinning, the whatever, someone who can help synagogues do that. So yes, but I guess I would just say that there is a real need for that.
Yeah, and before I go to Marty, I think one of the things that I sometimes hear and I don't agree with is they say, let's get the kids to do it. And it's like, well, yes, there is a chance that you can get certain people to do it, but for this to take on and to be where you want it to be, you have to ensure that everybody in your community has got the involvement. You don't want this just to be, it's only the young people that are involved in the running of the Zoom. I did see a hand. Marty, did I see your hand on this?
Yes. So, David, I'm curious. How many people do you anticipate watching your service online?
What do you mean by watching? Do you mean participating via Zoom? Do you mean watching over Facebook and YouTube? What can you
watching over Facebook, YouTube, Zoom, viewers on your platform?
It depends on the service.
It's hard to say, right?
Right now, me personally, I actually don't stream my services. I do them over Zoom because I want the interaction. The synagogue that I work at only streams to Facebook, YouTube, and they get 30, 40, 50 people watching.
30, 40, 50. And how many people for your service do you get, joining in on Zoom?
About 30.
About 30. And, really, if it's out there on YouTube or Facebook, you really never know who's watching, right? I mean, people could be joining in from anywhere at any time if they happen to see it, or if they hear about it from somebody else. You could get quite a lot of people watching. And so, it becomes kind of more important to kind of make sure that what people are seeing is really representative of what your synagogue and your service and your mission is about. But even more than getting back to the operational, what it takes to do a Zoom webinar or to do a live broadcast, a webcast, is you've got to have the people running sound. You've got people switching cameras if you've got more than one camera. You've got to make sure that the webcast is actually engaged, that it's turned on and is going out. And if it's Zoom, that's all set up properly. You've got to make sure that your participants are there.
I think what I want to do, I want to pause you there, Marty, not because I've got a ton of questions, but also I actually want to do another session later on to cover this, because I think this is a key thing. As we move away from the tech side of this, I think there's two key critical things that we have to deal with. We have to deal with who do we need to do this? And the bit that Rabbi David has talked about many times is how do we make sure that we deliver the spirituality and take the barrier of this tech out of the way. This is not, our job our job at the moment is to get the right bits of tech in place, but it isn't long-term going to be about that. It's about ensuring that the delivery of both the people that we need to do it and what we deliver. So I do want to bring that up. That makes sense?
Sure.
Okay. So I want to just move on to a couple of the other questions that we got really quickly before we run out of time. We've got a question here from Stephen Rabin. When I switch from fixed shared image on Zoom back to live camera with a live picture seen by participants, it's blurred for about 15 to 20 seconds. I can answer this really quickly. There's some massively clever things happening in Zoom. Zoom only sends you what it thinks it needs to send you. So unless somebody's spotlighted or pinned, the camera coming from each individual person is quite low. If you want to see what actually happens, if you click on any of the things, either audio or video at the bottom, video settings, and then go into statistics, you can see how your video will jump. Now this is the highest definition of Zoom out there, which is 1080p, this call. So it's going to do it even more because it doesn't want to send, what are we on at the moment, 9-10 times 1080p down, or that would kill everybody's connection. So it has to work out what it can send you so that you get the one person you really need in full high def and the rest at a lower definition. Okay, next question we have from Yuval. When casting Zoom, I often need to check and correct sound delay. Is there a solution for ensuring a sync between the video and audio? For some fingers. Yeah. Jonathan.
Yes, depending on your mixer, I guess, is the thing. I mean, I know if you've got, I think Yuval's got an XR18, a Behringer, and I think you have to insert an effect on the output and put a delay on that, and basically, modulate, adjust the delay.
So there's loads of reasons for it, of why the delay's there, but in simple terms, bringing in a camera at a native speed, it's around about 200 milliseconds, somewhere around there, slightly less. If you're running a webcam, it's better. If you want to do it without having to worry about it, if you insert the audio into the camera, so if you've got a camera that's got a mic input, that should come out of the HDMI connection in sync. But if you've got multiple cameras, it won't. Yuval, in the case, because I know the setup, he's running NDI. NDI adds in about a 220, 250 millisecond delay. SDI can also be sometimes slower, but there's lots and lots of variables out there. To test it, which is his question, is how to need to check the correct sound delay. It's a clap test. A clap test is the easiest way. You do that and you see if what I've just done, hopefully, is close enough. Am I way out?
You're a little out.
So I'm out. And invariably, it's always the audio you have to delay. As John said earlier when he was talking about it, your brain actually can't really see the delay the other way around. If the audio is behind the picture, your brain doesn't actually notice a problem. It's when the audio is first, you notice the lip sync all the time. The other way around, you very rarely notice it.
So typically, there's an offset somewhere in the software, isn't there, that you would adjust and you would play with, moving
OBS,
those seconds up and down.
Exactly. OBS and vMix have got offsets.
Right.
Hardware devices like the A10 Mini Pro have got offsets in the microphone inputs. Lots of other things have got offsets. And as John said earlier, John Fiber said, the Behringer, which is a lot of people are using that mixer, they've got it. In fact, virtually I don't know, there isn't a digital mixer that doesn't have some offset in there, because it's a pretty standard thing. Jay, Marty, quickly on that.
I was just going to say, I think probably every digital mixer gives you the ability to apply delay to either an output or a bus. And what's really nice is you can do it selectively. You only want to use the delay where it's needed. You don't want to insert any extra delay within your sanctuary system. You only want to use the delay for your outbound feed, and it's easy to do that.
Anything else on that, Marty?
Yeah, if you have multiple cameras, if you have more than one camera and they're different cameras, or they're taking different wiring paths to your video switcher, you will see different timings on those two cameras. Different cameras have different delays in their video because they're processing the video differently. And if one camera is coming in HDMI and another one is coming in NDI or SDI or different, or one is going over an extender, the video is going to arrive at different times from those same cameras, even though they're looking at the same physical real image. And so you may have to time the cameras together first. And what you would do is you would time the camera that you see first and delay that back to the last camera you see, so that, because you can't move a camera up in time, but you can move cameras back in time. So you want to time your cameras first, and then you time your audio to your cameras.
So just because this is quite a complex conversation, but one thing I would say is that native use of cameras, native connections, HDMI, SDI are pretty fast. NDI is also relatively fast. Any of the streaming things like H.264 that come out of the camera, so this is mainly used on things like security cameras where they actually are streaming, they can be about 2 seconds behind.
Or NDI-HX is delayed.
Yeah, but there is some really delay. The NDI-HX got much faster in the last release, but the streaming software ones can be up to 2 seconds, and 2 seconds is going to cause you a lot of work to try and solve on there. Okay, I'm just going to go through the last quick questions here. Is there a way of testing the loudness on Zoom, both mine and others? So you saw here, and hopefully if we can go into multi-gallery view. Is it up, gallery?
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Sorry, I forgot to actually switch, didn't I? We are looking at the meters here. This is a paid meter. There is a Julian meter that you can get for free. It is worth investing on getting a meter. It's pretty easy to set up. It takes a bit of time, but to set up a meter so that you can actually see what people look like. There are arguments about what you're aiming at. Somewhere between minus 22 and minus 24 and minus 15, depending on what you're sending out. I just noticed I'm hotter than I should be, but as long as you're in that sort of thing, it doesn't really matter. We want to get somewhere in between it. Okay, I know why I'm hot. There is 2 quick questions before we get onto this last bit on here. The first question from Richard Wolf, which is, how do you get full HD on Zoom? So you get 720p you can get through the Facebook portal or other devices like that. To get full HD, which is this, you have to get a full HD license, and that you have to write to Zoom to request.
You also have to have 10 accounts.
Also need a ton of bandwidth to do that too, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you need to have more bandwidth, and you have to have a account. And I happen to get it because of something we're doing with other people in similar environments. The reseller that we work in enables us to be able to get it. And I'm getting lots of wry smiles on people from this audience, but it is possible, but it is super tough at the moment to get it.
Only super special people can get full HD on Zoom, from Zoom. Super special.
Super special. Thank you. Or people know super special people, I think is probably the better description.
Right. I think you have to have if you're going to do it yourself, you need to have an enterprise account, which means you need to have 10 separate Zoom accounts to fill them up.
Exactly. So I think we've covered this one before. We've covered this that you put in here, which is prepping the Zoomies. Those that will participate is especially crucial. Again, I think we're going to park preparation, people, and what that is, because that makes, at the end of the day, and I think Marty, you've said it before, is about your saying about what amateurs and professionals, the difference.
Oh, well, professionals have a motivation that they want to get rehired. and charge a good rate. And so they need to do a good job. Volunteers don't have that same kind of motivation. They need to be motivated completely differently.
I think the way you said it, something like that is it amateurs practice until they can't?
Yeah, right. Amateurs practice until they get it right. Professionals practice until they cannot get it wrong.
And that is, and in our environment, spending a bit of time and everything getting the sound of everybody right and working on where they are and making sure that the microphones are not too hot is worth time and effort to make sure that they sound and look good, because it's what you're sending out. That's the representation of your synagogue, and that's the key piece. When you can't hear somebody and if you can't see them, if you can't hear them, it's a turn off. People walk away. So we've got some pretty heavy questions here, but I think we're going to have to do them in a 10-second comments. The first one is, with the population still being very cautious about COVID era, do you think that attendees will come back to large venues as they once did? You've got no more than 10 seconds on your
10
answer.
seconds to answer that
Go.
question. It's all going to depend. It's like boxers or briefs. It depends.
Okay. Marty?
I think they will, on occasion. I think they will come back for holidays and large events. I think people have finally realized that they don't need to come back to really be able to enjoy a service on a Saturday or Friday, Saturday morning.
Okay, I'm going to ask Brett to come in on this because he will have some good insight.
I'm going to say no. I'm going to say people will come back, but also that people are not as quick to come back and are being much more discerning than they once were. And so the need for all of this discussion that we're having today is really important. It's also not just what people are coming in person for, but the reach of what you're putting out there and who that's going to and who the potential reach can be. But yeah, I don't think people are coming back so quickly to 1,000 person events like they once did. There's a comfort level that people have, and then there's like that just step too far. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens this coming September for the High Holy Days. So,
following up on that, David and then Jay.
Me, David?
You are the only David here.
Will people return? Yes, I think they will. And I also think that some people won't. I think it's going to be a mixed bag. And as much as this hybrid thing or this, what is the reform we want to call it, multi-access is tricky and difficult, I think it's the future. And I think it presents tremendous potential benefits.
Jay.
So I agree with everyone who said some people will come back. Some people may not come back. Some people may come back selectively. It's going to take time for people to have confidence that they're going to be safe. But I think the place where they're likely to feel safest is in a congregation where members are looking out for each other, and I think that's going to be a really it's going to be a really it's going to take time for people to do that. At the same time, we should always be prepared to extend our services because some people, even whether or not there's a pandemic, they can't easily come out and come to services. We should cater to everybody, and this is a great way to do it.
I'm going to finish this question by asking somebody who has run her service back, and that's Sue. Hopefully she can unmute and we can hear Sue.
I think it's going to be mixed, without doubt. We're finding we were oversubscribed for Rabbi Lisa's service. There was more people that wanted to come than we would allow into the sanctuary. but also I think what we've gained is a lot of people that we had, which were former members. We've had people from Australia, Israel, all sorts of places joining us, which would never happen. So I think it's opened up a whole new world for us as well. So I think people will come back. Certainly, we're finding those that have had the 2 vaccinations are saying they want to come back. But I think it's going to be mixed. And the other thing is, of course, with our weather in the UK, I think more people will attend services in the winter than we're getting in the past.
Thank you, Sue. I'm gonna our final question, because it's time for us has come upon us, and I'm going to ask this one. Have you seen the church synagogue market take a lot of production ideas from the concert touring market? Maybe I'll start with Marty, because I know that you've got somewhere to go to in a second. So,
I can't speak to the synagogue market, but I know that, Christian and Baptist and other churches, Unitarian Universalist churches, not so much, but most of the Christian churches, yeah, they are absolutely, they have employed people who come from the touring industry, who have retired from touring, and now they're working for churches, and they're on a full-time basis. Yes, absolutely. You can look on YouTube for mega churches and get tours of all of the cameras and the technologies and the jib arms and the camera sliders and all of the sound. They're spending tens of millions of dollars to install technology in these churches.
there is a yearly conference in Orlando, which I don't know if any of the Florida-based people have been to the Houses of Worship conference. I think Jay may have been. Is that right? Have you been to?
Yeah, I think you're speaking of WFX, and I probably last went maybe 15 years ago when I was a systems integrator.
And
it's pretty huge.
Stuff there is huge. And as you say, it starts at the mega churches. It moves down. I'm not sure that there's going to be many synagogues with floating LED panels dropping from the ceiling, as I've seen with some places, and coming up from the ground. I don't know, Brett, is that what you're going to be doing at your synagogue?
So I don't think next year we're going to be doing that. But some of this tech is going to come down in price and be much more accessible for a lot of different organizations. And I think we will start in the next couple of years to see some of it being integrated, especially into larger houses of worship on the Jewish side, synagogues.
I was saying to Sue, I would love in her synagogue to roll a LED wall all the way around the very top, and then have the Zoom rooms like in panels around the room, and then there is your congregation. Every time you turn around, you're seeing the panels of the congregation. It could look quite...
I remember I was saying about planetariums. What could you do on that ceiling, right? That's image mapping on that ceiling.
Okay, J-Lo.
I think taking the question to a broader perspective is, so yes, we are absolutely borrowing production ideas from that, because we're realizing that each of these services is a production, and it's out there in the world to be consumed or not, or ignored. And I think it would be a mistake to not borrow from that community of people. I think people have been stepping up, and even in their own personal communications on Zoom, they've stepped up their cameras, they've stepped up their audio. They realize that this is their window to the world, is them in their box, like me in my box. And I think it's quite wise to do that. And even the value conversations that we've had with Marty and the Unitarian Universalist churches, that it's often argued that services are not shows. However, they operate a lot like a show, and that's still a little bit of a gray area.
So we've got to wrap up there because we've run really over time. So what you're saying is less Fiddler on the Roof and more Joseph in his Technicolor Dreamcoat is where we're going to in the future.
Can I make one more comment? One more comment?
3 seconds before I hand over to David.
Okay, so having this technology does nothing for us. The technology itself, all this equipment does nothing for us. It's how we use the technology as a tool to enhance the way that we deliver our message and to enhance the way that we affect people's moods and image and impressions. That's what's important.
The content creators.
Right. We've really run out of time. David, I just want to pass back over to you to give us a reminder of your event.
Just a reminder, June 27th, if you go to toratechguy.com/summit, we're going to have a summit. We're going to be talking about more in depth, even about how to bring honorees in, about cameras, about dynamizing your streaming content. We're going to be learning some Torah, hopefully with Rabbi David Ingber. We're going to be talking about some halachic issues, some Jewish legal issues around streaming and Shabbat and holidays. It's going to be a really wonderful day with a lot of the amazing people here. ProPresenter will be there, Cinemaker will be there. So please join us, toratechguy.com/summit. And it will be our, season finale.
Season finale for this season. So I'd like to thank the panel. I'd like to thank those that are here. Some have already had to disappear because there's other things that they're on. It's been absolutely brilliant. For those who've been watching this either on on YouTube or Facebook, you've got a recording straight away. You can watch this again. Remember, all the back episodes are available on YouTube. It's all there. We've compiled everything that you can get access to. Thank you again for joining us. And we'd like to say goodnight to you and hope this is of help. Good night.
Good night.